Morpheus Intelligence Update. So that's quite an exciting little thing for me to say, because this is a brand new thing that we're busy doing, and looking forward to what we're going to be doing today. So there we go. Morpheus Intelligence Update. This is the way we're going to get going. And so what is it about today? We are dealing with emotional intelligence and how it links to your health, wealth, and influence. And so a bit of a holistic presentation in a very quick while, kind of a high level, but I'm going to try and get enough detail for you to get lots of value out of the session today. And so I'm going to be doing it in a very interesting, simple pattern. I'm going to go what, why, who, when, and how. And I'm going to be taking you through those elements. And so we're going to finish on the how. And I think that's quite an important thing to be doing. So what is emotional intelligence? Well, the first thing is it's a skill. A lot of people don't realize this. A lot of people think that emotional intelligence is linked to personality. If you've got a certain kind of personality, you may have it. If you don't have that personality, you might not have it. In actual fact, I've worked with people in all sorts of different personalities and brain wirings. So, with StrengthsFinder, I've worked with a variety of profiles. With DISC, I've worked with many different profiles and other assessments as well. And there is no significant link between the overall emotional intelligence of a person and their personality. What is interesting is often certain personalities are stronger in one area and weaker of another area, and different personalities the other way around. So it does influence which elements, but the overall score is not about personality. The overall score is, it's a skill and you can develop it. And I'm going to take you through that in a little bit more detail now. And I've been working with leaders around the world on this, and I find it really, really interesting to see the lack of correlation actually directly with the personality profiles that we do. So what is it about? Well, it's really, there's two levels of emotional intelligence, and then I'm going to at the end mention a third level, which is a little bit different. But the first level is personal emotional intelligence. This is your awareness of self, your own emotions, and the second part of this is the management of that. And so this is the thing where if you have a fight with your spouse or partner on the way to work, don't take it out on your staff members. So the whole idea of personal emotional intelligence is the awareness that what's happening to me is not actually related to the person I'm going to speak to. Of course, the flip side just as much, where you're driving home, you've had a bad day at work, and you walk in and the dog just looks at you and you kick the dog. This is not great emotional intelligence. So it's got these two components of self-awareness and self-management, or even self-leadership, where we can then integrate all of that together. So that's the first level, and those two components. The second level of emotional intelligence is the social level. And this has an awareness of other level to it. And we will sometimes call that the skill of empathy. Now, some of you might be aware that there's even a talent of empathy. That only impacts a small percentage of the skill of empathy. So the skill of empathy is a much more encompassing thing. It is a much more broader thing of the overall awareness of other people's emotions. And, just the awareness that you probably don't want to have that particular conversation with this team member at this time when this is what they're feeling or this is what they're experiencing. And so this really gets us into the heart space of really understanding that and then managing the relationships accordingly. So our social emotional intelligence, the relational component, is once we are aware of what's really going on, what is the mood, what's happening with individuals in the team, what's the overall feeling in the team, then we are much more open to manage that and lead that properly. Sometimes it might be, let's just take a break in the meeting right now. That could be a great one. Sometimes it's that tough conversation that you need to have. Let me book it for tomorrow. That kind of thing. That's the social or relational emotional intelligence. And so those four elements, the self-awareness and self-management, the social awareness and the relational management, that is the core of what emotional intelligence is all about. But there is a third layer. And so we have these first two layers, the personal and social layer, but there is also something called a relational system. Now, we're going to do a whole separate webinar just on this in a couple of months' time. And so we decided it was too much to try and fit into this session. And so the relational systems intelligence is where we look at the intelligence and the management of the intelligence of a system, a relational system. So just to give you an idea, so that you know what I'm talking about, it's this thing that when you have two people get together, that's a system. But if you add a third person, the system changes and the dynamic changes within that system. And systems are intelligent. Systems are not about the individual. It's about the composite relationship between the people. So very, very important for teams, for example, to be aware of relational systems. And so that's quite a key element there. I'll give you one more little example because I think it's quite humorous. It's that scenario where two team members get together. They feel they've really got to discuss something with the manager or the team leader that is quite an issue for both of them. And they both agree and they're in agreement. They walk into the team manager's office or into the Zoom meeting for the meeting. And suddenly the one person backs down and the other one tries to speak and feels like they've lost the support of the other person. It's because the system changed. And then this other person wasn't being weak. They just simply behave differently in that system from what they behaved in the one-on-one. And that's the relational systems intelligence that's so important. So that's not what today's about, but I just wanted you to be aware there is another layer that is not normally considered part of emotional intelligence, but it's quite important. So let's get on to the why of emotional intelligence. Why do we need it? Why is this so important in our day-to-day lives, our lives of influence, our health and our wealth? Let's talk about that a little bit. So here's one of the first ones that I think is fascinating, and that is that EQ is more important than IQ. And there's a wonderful saying that says, IQ will get you hired, EQ will get you promoted. And this is a really interesting kind of concept that very often, especially in the earlier parts of our career, we focus a lot on our intelligence, how sharp we are, how educated we are, and that is what gets us going in a lot of our career. But to reach senior levels, and I'm not just talking leadership levels, even individual contributors reaching a very senior high performance niche in their lives requires much more EQ than IQ. The reality is that our IQ peaks at around about the age of sort of 19 or 20. Now, it does vary a little bit from person to person, but IQ does peak very early on in our lives, whereas EQ is on a steady trajectory and probably peaks at this stage. We're not sure of the research, but probably in our 50s is when it's going to peak. I don't know if that means I've only got 3 years left and then I'm going to go downhill. Maybe, I don't know. But it does peak in much later in life. And I've even heard this, that IQ gets you hired, poor EQ gets you fired. And I think that's a really interesting dynamic to be aware of. So it not only helps with your promotion if you have it, but if you don't develop it, it actually probably will be quite career limiting. The next piece is 58% of a leader's job's performance depends on EQ. Now, I want to be clear. A lot more than 58% is improved by EQ, but 58% actually depends. The performance of a leader, 58% is 100% dependent on EQ. That's, to me, a kind of a frightening statistic, to realize that if you really want to grow in terms of your influence, then this is going to be a significant key. So what we'd like to do is I'd actually like to ask you a question in the chat. So I've asked Cindy if she will paste this question into the chat for you, and maybe you can just give us a bit of feedback. How successful are you in positively influencing and impacting others? On a scale of 1 to 10, what would you put? And just give us the numbers. Is it 1, 3, 5, 7, 8, 10? Okay. All right. Got some interesting numbers coming through. Quite a lot of high EQ people here, it seems. Brilliant. Okay. Wow. Okay, some a little bit lower. Very, very interesting. Really appreciate your participation in that. And so we've got a range here that I've seen is somewhere around 5 through to 9. So thank you very much for that. And isn't that quite interesting, is that one of the ways that we might increase our influence in life is by improving our emotional intelligence. So thank you very much for that. All right, just to continue then, is EQ is crucial to discovering and living your essence. So you may wonder, what is this essence thing, Ian? Well, it's your truest self. And what we found is that without that self-awareness and the social awareness and the self-leadership and the relational leadership, we might find a lot of trouble in really bringing forth who we really, really are. And I believe the most powerful thing you can do in life is to increase your life as being an expression of your truest self. And so this is really where emotional intelligence can play a significant role in enabling you to be aware and express that truest self of yours. So that is a really interesting thing. And in particular, the self-awareness and then the outflow and management. But you'd be amazed at how important the empathy, the awareness of the emotions of others can actually tune in, and you can then bring your best to that situation as well. And so it definitely impacts both. And then it influences health. So there's been a whole lot of very, very interesting research lately, specifically linking to the sort of COVID work from home scenario, where they're now showing incredible correlation between those who are coping under COVID and those who have a strong emotional intelligence. And so there's an incredible correlation, and they're talking about your physical health, your emotional health, your social health directly linked to it. And it kind of makes sense, doesn't it, that you've got this idea of your self-awareness and your self-leadership is going to clearly have an impact on how you manage yourself, how you manage your stress, your anxiety, your relationships. A lot of people have been under incredible relational stress as they've gone through this period of our lives, this interesting season that the world is in. And then who is it for? So we've done the what and the why. Let's get into the who. And so who is emotional intelligence for? Who will benefit from growing their emotional intelligence? And so the first thing is anyone who wants to live and lead from their truest selves. If you want to have a maximum impact of your life, even maybe leave a legacy, it's going to be very closely linked to your level of emotional intelligence. The more you invest in growing that self-awareness and social awareness, and then managing both of those, the more likely you are to have a wonderful impact. And why from your truest self? Because it's almost an unlimited resource. There's a very big difference from trying to and forcing yourself to be somebody else versus relaxing into bringing the fullness of who you really are. And I always believe our greatest potential lies in who we really are, and bringing that to the world. The second one is anyone who wants to influence. And so some of you might not even view yourself as leaders, but you know what, if you're a parent, if you're a teacher, if you're a coach, if you're a trainer, if you are in any way a person who influences others, then this is for you, because this will significantly improve your ability to impact others and change lives. And I'm going to go with a personal story here. I went through an incredible journey of discovering the big deficits in my emotional intelligence. And this was 10 years ago. And I started to notice that as I invested in getting to really know myself, understand myself, be more socially aware, emotionally aware, that kind of thing, I was going and doing leadership training all over the world. I've now trained leaders from more than 80 countries, or from 80 countries. And what's really interesting is without me changing my techniques, I'm getting very different and better feedback. And the more I've invested in my own emotional intelligence, the greater the impact that I have as I'm out there training and speaking and so on. And the same would apply to anybody who's influencing. So that's another who. And then finally, anyone who wants to improve their income or get promoted. Now, this might sound very interesting, but we have some fascinating research. Let me give you two little pieces that I think you might find very interesting. 90% of top performers have high levels of emotional intelligence. So there's an incredible, when you look at the top performers in any organization, we're talking about the top 25 percentile or whatever, 90% of them have significantly above average emotional intelligence. So this is really, really interesting. But here's where it gets even more interesting. So just like IQ, emotional intelligence is measured on a scale where 100 is the norm. And what's very interesting is they've now got research that shows that if you take two people in the same job, the one who has higher emotional intelligence, for every 1 point. So let's say you've got somebody at 100 and you've got another person at 110. Those 10 points, for every one of those 10 points, they earn $1,300 a year more. Now, that's really interesting. That's $13,000 a year for 10 points difference. So if you grow your emotional intelligence from 100 to 110, chances are there's going to be an outflow that's going to connect to what you earn. And so emotional intelligence can directly impact our level of earning if we do not grow it. And if we do grow it, it can significantly move us forward. I find that a particularly fascinating piece of research. And so let's do a little thing in the chat again. Does your income currently reflect the full value of your life and potential? And let's have a look, just yes and no answers. We're not taking this overly seriously, so don't worry too much. So does it reflect the full value of your life and potential? Very interesting. A lot of people saying no. And yeah, I think this is a really, really big thing for us to be aware of. Okay. Chris says you should be earning millions. And Chris, I know you should be earning millions. That voice of yours and what you do, you should be earning millions. I agree 100%. Okay, very good. Very nice. Thank you, everybody. All right, let's continue then and have a look. I know I'm watching the time quite carefully and I want to have a little bit of time for Q&A. So when is it needed? So we've done the what, the why, and the who. Let's talk about the when. So why emotional intelligence now? Why specifically at the season that we're in? And the first one is this: remote working is taking an incredible toll on people's physical, mental, and social health. And I know there are people who are thriving. I think I've been one of the fortunate ones that over the last year, my business and other things have thrived, and I'm in a very good space at the moment, but many people are not. And many people are really suffering. I saw one statistic the other day from a psychologist who says that getting access to a psychiatrist at the moment in South Africa is almost impossible. You're going to have a month's wait, many months of waiting list, because they are so flooded with people who are in serious trouble. So there is a physical strain, there is a mental strain, there is a social strain that is being introduced from this sort of work from home. You know, I'm a full-time worker, I'm a full-time parent, I'm a full-time school teacher, just about, you know, all of these things. And many people with strong social needs have really suffered as well. And so this has been quite a significant step, this sort of realization that that we have, we're in a bit of a crisis for many people. And the reality is emotional intelligence addresses all three of these. It not 100% obviously, but it has a significant impact. People with higher EQ are doing better physically, mentally, and socially. Which leads us to our final little quiz. How many of the following are you content with? Are you content with your physical health, your mental health, your relational health? And it could be 0, 1, 2, or 3 would be the poll. 0, 1, 2, or 3. Okay, so Ryan's content with 2 of the 3. Okay, very good. Okay, so 1. I would probably put myself as a 2. Yeah. A 1 or a 2. Yeah. Okay. All right. Very, very interesting to see where some of the gaps are in our lives and to be quite aware. Okay. So thank you very much. Nice one. Nice one. All right. So, so this is one of the things, the urgencies of it, because this is important. Our physical, mental, and social health is absolutely critical to us. Another reason of why now is people are tired of suppressing their truest selves. I think we've come through a season where a lot of people have felt the pressure to be something other than who they are. There's a lot of social pressure. There's a lot of social media pressure to be something other than who you really are. And to even put up a false front. You know, you put on that Instagram version of yourself, you know, as opposed to your truest self, which is both full of brilliant strengths and genius, and some extreme vulnerabilities and weakness. And that combination, we want to bring the fullness. And people are tired of the false and pretentious kind of thing of, you know, everything's perfect and shiny and happy and healthy in my life, when in fact, none of us are 100%. But we're tired of suppressing ourselves, and in particular, that essence that we have that will bring the most value. Now is the urgency in bringing that out. And therefore, emotional intelligence growth is a big piece of it. And then finally, if you want to grow in life, whether it's your essence journey, your truest self journey, or your journey as a leader, your journey as a parent, emotional intelligence is the core skill that will get you there. And so that is really, really important in making that path forward. Now, to wrap everything up, how do I grow it? How can I grow it? I said in my very first slide that it's something that you can grow. So how do we grow this emotional intelligence? So I've got a couple of ideas for you. And the first one is, do one of the assessments. Now, there are sort of two types of assessment, or two levels of assessment. Some of them are what we call 360s, where you get other people's opinions, because I guess if you don't have a good emotional intelligence, will you even trust the answers of your emotional intelligence test? Would you be self-aware enough to do it? Now, I've seen some ones that aren't 360s that are brilliant, and I've worked with the people and discovered that there's a lot of detail in there that in fact is true. So I think the better ones have actually worked with that quite a lot. But there are some really good ones out there, and I wouldn't do like a Facebook one. I'm really clear about that. You want to do something that is genuine and researched and all the rest of it. And when you get your results, some of them, for example, will allow you to retest 6 months later, because it's a skill and you can over 6 months grow it. And I would strongly advocate then working with some sort of a coach as well, but I'm going to come back to that a little bit later. Secondly, develop mindfulness practices. Mindfulness is an absolute key to being able to develop and grow the emotional intelligence in your life. So, you know, right from mindfulness, meditation, yoga, that whole thing of just slowing down a little bit, de-stressing. So this is not only something that will help you grow your emotional intelligence, it'll also help you to manage it. So, you know, if you're on your way home and you realize you've had a really rough day and you don't want to take it out on your family, stop and do some breathing. There's some great breathing exercises like box breathing and those kinds of things. Do some mindfulness, do some sort of a meditation, but do find a way. So it's not only about the practice of emotional intelligence, but through it, your awareness will grow, and therefore you will actually develop your emotional intelligence as well. So there's a bit of a double benefit from anything to do with mindfulness. Some people will do yoga. There'll be many different ways that different people will approach this, but this is what's really important. Then we have build your EQ growth team. Build your EQ growth team. And my advice, and I give this advice on most things that I do, is don't try this alone. You know, we have that saying, don't try this at home. I would put in there as my little disclaimer, don't try this alone. If you really want to grow your emotional intelligence, it's got such a strong relational component that you probably want to have a friend that you can do it with. Have an emotional intelligence team that you can work with. Have a coach maybe. That would be another part that would be really important. But don't try this alone. Because it's so relational, and because we're going to have blind spots and we're going to have good days and bad days, we need connection, we need community. And above all, right now, we have more of a need for community than ever. One of the big mistakes was when they called the need for physical distance, they called it social distancing. We need social connection more than ever in life right now. But we sometimes, for safety reasons, do need to physically distance, but really what we need is great social connection, and grow your emotional intelligence. Have as a challenge, get a couple of your friends together and decide, do the assessment together, or maybe some colleagues, do it together, and then collaborate with each other on the path of growth for yourself. And then finally, out of all of that, put a plan together. And the plan is grow your knowledge of emotional intelligence. There's some very specific things that can make you way more aware. And there's some brilliant books written on the subject as well. And of course, within the Morpheus framework, we have some products that might be useful. Then skills. How do we develop the skills? Well, I've already mentioned, mindfulness skills and that kind of thing. And there are very definite skills for decompressing, debriefing based on the self-awareness. And then finally, a lot of it is mindset. A lot of it is, we think we are so much stuck in the mindset of it's all about my intelligence, my creativity, and we forget that both intelligence and creativity thrive in an emotionally intelligent world. And that's where the mindset needs to change, where we could be stuck in a mindset of my way of advancing. I'm just read another book, but I'm not actually growing my self-awareness and my emotional intelligence. And so the mindset to me is perhaps the most important key in this plan to develop and grow your emotional intelligence. So that is the Morpheus Intelligence Update.